This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Bad cops, good cops, bad police drama, good police drama. We get all of these options and much, much more as we talk about the 2002 police action drama Narc, starring Ray Liotta and Jason Patric. The next few episodes Chris and I will be doing, it will be in honor of the incredible acting legacy of Ray Liotta, who passed away suddenly in May of 2020. Chris and I would love to celebrate the life and work of one of the most amazing actors of our time, that being Ray Liotta. We talked a lot about the movies of Ray Liotta, and he made so many great movies. Chris, you suggested Narc right out of the gate when we started to plan a series of episodes on the career of Ray Liotta. Why Narc to start off with?
I've always loved this movie. I watched it when it first came out, and Ray Liotta's performance in the movie is, to me, the best work he's ever done, because him and Jason carry the movie, but I would say Ray Liotta's performance is what really carries this movie. And there's a certain level of intensity that Ray establishes early in the movie, and he keeps it throughout the entire thing, and it's 100% believable.
The movie really is. I mean, intensity is really what the movie is all about, and it starts right out of the very first scene in the movie is the character, Jason Patric's character, Nick. He's preparing some sort of drug or something, and he's using it. You can tell that he's strung out, but then he starts chasing on foot a suspect, and they're just running over things, under things, running through apartments, through Detroit. That's the setting of the movie, is in Detroit. And finally, well, the person who is running, the criminal, he injects some drugs into someone he had taken hostage, and the guy starts overdosing. Then the perp keeps running, and he runs into a playground and grabs a kid, and Nick pulls out his gun, his police service revolver, and starts shooting. And I think that very first scene kind of sets the morality of the movie and the ambiguity of the movie. And I wonder what you thought about that, Chris.
I mean, given the circumstances, Nick, in ideal circumstances, you don't pull out your gun in that situation and fire wildly, but you have a few seconds to make that decision. And given the circumstances, I don't really think he had any other option. There's no calling back up in that situation. And if Nick didn't take the shot, that mother and that baby were dead 100%.
I think that scene, it definitely set the intensity of the movie, that this movie was going to be turned up to 11 the entire time, of which it was. I just think with that shooting, that Nick is completely out of breath. You can't run like that and jump through obstacle courses, and he's pretty much doing parkour the whole time. And then you pull out your gun and start just shooting wildly one-handed. I thought it was even more kind of ridiculous and insane than what I thought it was going to be initially, that he would stop, take a nice lined up shot while this criminal is holding a kid, and then shoot him in the head, which is pretty classic action movie. I mean, he just wildly fires an entire magazine into a playground, where the backdrop of the playground is an apartment building. I mean, he could have killed tons and tons of people with what he was doing. Plus, he was on drugs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's Nick in this situation. You find out later that he was an undercover police officer. And the unfortunate reality is for a lot of these guys that are undercover police officers, they have to use to truly play the part because you can't go to a bunch of hardcore drug dealers or a bunch of hardcore drug addicts that you're trying to get information from to give to the police organization or to get information for the guys that are higher up and go, actually, you know what? I'm not going to use. They're not going to tell you anything. They're not going to trust you. And they're going to find out pretty quickly that you're a cop. Now, we can talk about like later in the episode about, is that really fair to be putting a police officer in that situation or anybody for that matter? But I mean, at the end of the day, he started using and got addicted to it and was strung out on it. I mean, just that scene and then looking at the circumstances, I really can't fault Nick for taking the shots that he did because I'm almost 100% convinced that junkie was going to kill that baby and the mother. And by his actions, the baby survived and the mother survived. But unfortunately, the baby that she had inside her ends up passing because of a bullet deflecting off a piece of metal from the playground.
Yeah, I wonder. And my thinking was, once that criminal injected the drugs into the first person he took hostage, shouldn't Nick have just stopped and let the guy go? Now Nick knows who. Sure, his cover's been blown. I just wonder, to myself, what was Nick's motivation at that point when he goes into the playground and just starts firing wildly? Is it to save himself? Is it to save his case? Because at that point, is public safety really his primary motivation when one person's ODing that he just left in the dust and then he shoots wildly into a playground?
I guess the logic is that Nick knows this particular criminal better than anybody else, right? And maybe this criminal was going to just go start killing a bunch of people. And Nick knew that he had to stop him right there and then. And if he didn't, he probably would have just went around killing more people.
Did they ever set up what that guy was all about? I don't think they really explained it, did they? That he was just a higher level
drug dealer and dealing a particularly potent version of I believe it's heroin or some version of crack that is killing people. So as you can see when he stabs the one guy and kills him almost instantaneously.
And I really think that at that point, that's where you stop. Your cover's blown. It's over. Try and save this guy that's ODing and let the guy go and call the regular cops to go find him, canvass the neighborhood or whatever. I think that Jason Patric made a very bad choice that it killed one person for sure. And it maybe he could have saved that guy who was ODing on the ground, who had been stuck with the needle. I think that's the first do no harm, and Nick did a lot of harm in that situation, and he kind of pushed the situation into a bad place that eventually this guy was going to get cornered, the person that they're chasing, and something bad was going to happen. I think it opens up the whole can of worms of cops and high-speed chases, which they're starting to dial back on, that maybe these aren't a really good choice for us to make.
I read about that, and from my understanding, unless the suspect is somebody, I don't know, Pablo Escobar or somebody like OJ Simpson or like a serial killer that's running away, most times they'll just let the guy go and they'll try to get him later. But you're not like, the police department thought that Nick used not the best judgment too, because the next scene we see him talking to in a police board whose job is to question cops and their line of duty.
And Nick's none too happy that he's being questioned on this. They set up some exposition along the way that Nick is on some sort of administrative leave on 3/4 pay, and it's seems like it's starting to hurt financially, that he's not making his full pay, and Nick is hurting that he's not working either, that he's at home, he's taking care of the baby, but he's not fulfilled by that. I wonder now, a really good question is, because policing and these issues are completely on the forefront today. How much should the police be questioned on the decisions they make when they are? I mean, I can't argue that the cops make life and death decisions on the drop of a hat, on a drop of a dime, split second decisions. How much should we be questioning them on these decisions?
Well, I mean, we need oversight. We need things like internal affairs, because we've seen it firsthand, especially like during the 70s. There's like a famous example with the two cops that literally were working for the mob. So, and doing the hits for the mob. So obviously we need internal affairs. We need some oversight. Nick, in this particular circumstances, was getting so upset with them, and this is just my opinion, is like, you guys put me out there as an undercover cop to get this information, and knowing full well that I was going to have to start using and start hanging around people that are, willing to just murder babies, pimp their daughters out, the lowest of the low, like absolute evil. And you guys, many of these, it's implied in the movie that the people questioning him really haven't had any on-ground police experience. They're just reading it from a manual. And these are the people that are questioning Nick's judgment. These are the people saying that Nick is a bad cop, et cetera, et cetera. I can understand his frustration, but I can understand that this is necessary. But you would figure it would be cops who had done undercover work themselves would be the one questioning his decision making in that situation.
Do you think, though, that, I mean, so that clearly you need some sort of oversight. Nick feels terrible about what he's done. You can just tell that it's rocked him to his very foundations, his soul, that he's a broken person for what he's done, and he desperately wants to make amends for what he's done, that he shot that mom, killed the baby, the baby in the mom, could have killed the toddler that she had with her at the playground, but he also doesn't want to completely own it, I guess, by the department's rules. And I think you can't have it both ways. I think Nick knew what he did. Maybe that's the question. Do you think Nick felt that he did what he had to do and it just had a negative outcome? Or did Nick feel bad just in general, that he shouldn't have done what he did in an absolute term?
I think Nick feels bad about what had happened, because they mentioned that he got into contact with the mother afterwards against police department orders, I guess, because there was some kind of lawsuit, you would assume, of the sort. And Nick just said, screw that, I'm going to tell her like what happened, and I feel terrible about what had happened. But I don't think Nick feels like he could have handled that situation any differently, other than not, maybe not getting addicted to the junk. But given the circumstances and the type of work that he was doing, it's a lot to ask for people. That's the thing with heroin. It's with heroin and crack, especially heroin, it can be instantaneously addictive, where there are stories where people take a hit of heroin and then that's it, they're hooked.
I think somebody like, with Nick, they offer him what they really want Nick to do is to come back in a very limited function on the police force to investigate another undercover cop who died under suspicious circumstances while in the field. And I get the feeling that Nick wanted this to take it on to kind of redeem himself by finding out what happened to this other officer, Calvez, who was under deep cover. He felt like he could maybe rehabilitate and find some peace with what he had done.
Yeah, if I can solve this case, it will, make amends for the mistakes that I made from when I was undercover, right? It's a very logical way of looking at it, in my opinion. It's understandable.
But how, in a way, could he really make up for what he did by helping this other guy's case? That was one of the things that I found kind of difficult to wrap my mind around.
Well, I mean, you could say like I screwed up my undercover job, but I'm going to get this case right, and it's going to show that I'm still a good cop, I'm still a good person, and I'm going to get these guys who had murdered this Calvez.
I like it how he also, Nick makes it perfectly clear to the powers that be that if he comes back on to investigate this case, he wants to be put back on the force, but he only wants to have a desk job. He wants to have a job that's pushing papers and 9 to 5, and that's it. That he doesn't want to ever be involved in, I guess what you might say, real policing again.
Yeah, he sees this. Well, it's a twofold. He sees this as an opportunity at redemption, and he also sees this as an opportunity of, okay, I'm going to get that desk job that my wife desperately wants me to get, because we find out during the movie that Nick has an obsessive personality trait where he gets so deep and involved in the case that everything becomes just background noise.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors. Nick's wife doesn't love the idea of him going back into the field, and that causes a lot of conflict. And I wonder, I mean, what do you think? Should Nick have just rode this out? Was it worth it for Nick to go back onto the job and jeopardize his family? Because his family is really the only thing that he has.
I guess my response would be like, once a cop, always a cop. And he sees an opportunity at some form of redemption if he can solve this murder. And maybe slightly rehabilitate his reputation and his career. And I would argue that his wife should have been at least a bit more understanding about it, because she's immediately, at first she kind of goes along with it, but then almost immediately starts giving him a hard time. She married a cop.
In a lot of ways, though, I think that Nick, he gave her kind of a false idea that, oh, I'm just going to do this so that I can have my desk job. And I think he was half in and half out. I think initially he wanted to do this just to get that desk job. But once he was back in to the policing, he couldn't quit being a cop. He even kind of says, well, he does say that to the wife later on, that what am I going to do? That, being a cop is the only thing that I can do. And I think that his wife and in a way you find something else to do. What he really wanted, I think in a lot of ways, is that being a cop was more important to him than anything.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, I would say that's accurate. I mean, like I pointed out earlier, like once a cop, always a cop. In the next case, he's never going to stop being a cop. And I mean, the reason why his wife was so apprehensive about him taking the case anyways, regardless of what he said, was she knew what was going to happen. He was going to start becoming obsessive about it. And probably this case was going to lead to another case, and she's just saw him going right back into it. And it's understandable from her perspective. She mentions that she was in rehab with him when she was 6 months pregnant, trying to get off the junk. And she saw like the worst of him undercover. So yeah, it makes sense that she wouldn't want that for him at all. She loves him, she cares about him, but at the same time, that's who Nick is, right? He's a cop.
You're really right too, that he's obsessive. He doesn't go into this. He goes into taking this case not completely bought into it, but once he's involved, it's just his entire life. He's at the police station 24 hours a day, and he comes home late. And at first his wife kind of tolerates it, but it's less and less and less as the movie goes by, until the point where she leaves him.
Yeah. And Nick is just doesn't even really acknowledge it. He's just staring at the mirror thinking about Calvez.
Yeah, he cannot give it up.
Until he solves the case. I mean, and that's a quality. I mean, we could argue, is that a quality? Is that a good quality in a cop, or is that a bad quality? I'm not sure.
Is that a good quality in a person, though? Is it worth nuking your family over this case when once the case is solved? Like, I mean, even as a practical matter, no matter how emotionally invested you are in it, it's a case that's going to be over at some point. Then you've completely destroyed your family. And then what?
It's true, right? And there's some people who are like that, like they're willing to sacrifice it all. Is it worth it? Probably not to me and you, probably to not to most people, but to Nick probably is worth it, because that would eat away at him for the rest of his life if he just kind of half-assed this case and didn't really try to solve it. It was a cop that was murdered, right? It wasn't, somebody who Nick didn't know, but he was a cop.
There are a lot of people who just get obsessed with work, workaholics who will, they get a call for overtime at 8 o'clock at night, and it doesn't even have to be a cop. It could be somebody who's a doctor or a nurse, or, a shift at the plant. Like, work always comes first. Do you think that the police work is somehow maybe more understood, or that Nick's wife should be more understanding of that, instead of, oh, I'm getting called to work third shift at the plant, and I love working and I want money and I want to do it? Do you think that higher calling maybe is something that she should be more understanding of?
I would say so, because he's investigating a murder. It's like a doctor. Like, I have to take this call. Somebody's going to die if I, don't get to the hospital in time. And when you marry these not every cop is like Nick. Most cops are not like Nick. They're not obsessive in the way that Nick is, but you have to understand that that's a possibility when you marry a police officer, that he's going to get calls like this, or he's going to get cases where it does become an obsession. But at the end of the day, he's trying to solve a murder to, help the family, to help the family with the grieving process, but to also potentially just get to catch the murderer so he doesn't do it again.
My thought is, though, does Nick's wife see that he's never going to accept just working a desk for the rest of his 10 years on the force or whatever, and then he takes his 20 years pension? Like, that's never going to be Nick. Is this really the time she should bail, knowing now she really knows who Nick is? Because they were very freshly married. I think they said they'd only been together for like a year, 2 years or something. They had only been married like a year and a half, and only even together for not much longer before than that. Is that the point where she should make the break? Because that's the make or break, really. Nick is obviously who he is, and that's not going to change. Does Nick have to change, or does his wife just have to leave?
I think, well, that's what that final scene is she came to the conclusion that he was never going to take that desk job. If she was going to stay married with Nick, she was either going to have to get used to seeing Nick like this, or getting like this once in a while, or leave. And she came to the conclusion that I don't want to be around this, and left, because Nick was never going to change. And I think to me, it would be unfair to ask him to change.
This starts to make me think of The Wrestler.
Yeah.
In that,
a lot, actually.
Yeah. That Randy in The Wrestler was never going to stop being who he was. But if you look at Randy never committed. Nick did commit, and Nick had a child. Well, Randy had a child too. Isn't there something that's your commitment to your child and to your family goes above your work?
But the way Nick would look at it is, well, I'm trying to make the streets safer. like for not just my family, but for everyone's family. He's investigating a guy that if he's willing to kill a cop, what else is he willing to do? You know what I mean? So we're talking about a really hardcore criminal that, if he has no compunction about killing a cop, he'll kill me and you or his wife or his kid, like no problem, and not even think about it. I guess that's the way Nick would look at it. But I understand your perspective, and the majority of people would probably have your perspective too. It's your family comes first, and the job comes second.
We're going to get back to Henry because Henry's an interesting case. Ray Liotta's character is an interesting character to balance against Nick. But let's just go this one next step with Nick. Nick's been a cop, presumably for a couple of years, since he's been on leave for a certain amount of time, and he was undercover for a long time, and it takes a while to become a detective. He's not a rookie. Nick knows what the system is. So in the end, we find out that this whole case that he's trying to solve of who murdered the undercover officer Calvez killed himself. He wasn't murdered by the drug dealers and the thugs. The life finally caught up with them, and he couldn't live with who he was anymore, and he killed himself, which is a whole nother issue we can get into it in a bit. But shouldn't Nick know that the system is broken and one person is going to fix it? Why is Nick on this, tilting at windmills over the things that he actually does have impact on? He can decide not to wreck his family. You're never going to make one cop is never going to make the streets of Detroit safe.
Yeah, but I mean, we could look at all different types. Like, I don't know, we'll use, say, like the Catholic Church as an example, right? You're not going to fix, you could pick any point in history, right? You're not going to fix the organization yourself, but people have always devoted their lives to it. Obviously, some more than others. Like look at Francis of Assisi. At the time, the church was really messed up, but he still devoted his entire life to it. And I would say that he changed it, but after he passed away, people kind of used him as an example of what needed to get changed about the church. I would say Nick is like one of those types of people where they're not so much concerned about, they're not so much concerned about trying to like fix the whole thing. They're just trying to make as much of a difference that they can make in their own way, and maybe set an example for others.
That will lead us into Ray Liotta's character. Ray Liotta's character is 100% hard charging cop, and he's somebody who is very much willing to break the rules for a good outcome. And I wonder what you think about that kind of character, that Ray Liotta has a very strong moral code in which if he has to bend or break rules to do the right thing, he's going to do that. And what do you think about that?
I mean, it's probably not a popular opinion, but I get it. I mean, the first scene that we see Ray Liotta, you're not supposed to hit a criminal after the fact, right? He's been arrested, and the first scene we see Ray Liotta, he's putting an 8-ball in a sock, and he's smashing a guy that they're bringing into the precinct. But the reason he's smashing him in the face is because the guy was beating up his wife and daughter, God knows, probably with an inch of their life. And I mean, is Ray supposed to do that? Is Henry Oakes supposed to do that? Oh, obviously not. And they mentioned in the movie that he's a loose cannon, but I'm not going to be very upset about it.
Those are all really specific cases, though. I guess, so I think they show that almost as the extreme, that this guy beats his wife, he beats his kids, and he got a tune-up, as they say, from Henry. And maybe that'll teach that guy a lesson, and maybe it won't. But you start getting into gray areas where, we have a whole system, Constitution and all that. It's meant to protect that guy from that behavior, that the cops aren't the judge and the jury and the executioner. They have a specific job to do. And maybe the rest of the judicial system is failing. But again, what if Henry goes, goes off on somebody else who they're innocent just because he had a hunch that the person was a bad guy, quote unquote. I think that the system is really put in place to check your individual morality, because your individual morality isn't the thing that the justice system's concerned with.
No, and that's, I mean, it's all true, right? But if anyone's actually honest with themselves, is it not infuriating that somebody who pimps out their own daughter has the exact same rights as you and me? Anybody who's honest with themselves will say that that's infuriating. I get why it's in place, and I wouldn't want that to change. All I'm saying is there's a reason why Charles Bronson and Death Wish is like a very well-beloved movie.
But can a cop be a vigilante? That's the question.
No,
or should a cop be a vigilante is probably even more to the point.
No, that they're not supposed to be, right? And as you pointed out, there's so much room for abuse, right? And we can list like numerous examples of the cops abusing their power. It's not it's very popular in the news right now anyways. But with Henry's case in particular, I don't think Henry is going to tune up an innocent person. This is going to be somebody like Henry's going to tune up somebody who beats their wives, right? Or sells junk to little kids, or like there's no ambiguity about like, oh, did this person do this or did this person do? No, this person is the scum of the earth. From Detroit, right? Which should tell you, right? Like Detroit is, out of all the bad cities, Detroit is one of the worst of the worst. I don't like from what I've seen, what I watched the movie and the care, like how they present Henry is, I don't think Henry's gonna beat up somebody with an 8-ball when there's a possibility that this person didn't do what they're accused of doing.
Just couldn't that it could cross the line so many times though, where what if the person it's a 17-year-old kid who does is raised in this environment and does go and sell drugs on the corner, and Henry's going to roll up on him and just start beating him with this club. Like, I think that Henry just wasn't in the right mindset. Maybe he was burned out. Maybe he was PTSD. I don't think he was in the right place mentally for what he was doing.
Well, they mentioned in the movie too, right, that Henry is a loose cannon and he's had a bunch of troubles with internal affairs with the police organization too, right? So he's on their radar. I mean, immediately when Nick comes onto the case, Henry asks him, like, are you undercover for internal affairs?
Yeah.
Junkie cop, that first case back, he's trying to solve this cop murder, and I'm already under the precinct's radar. So it's not like the police department is not aware of the problems with Henry. But like I said, like, am I upset that Henry beat up a child abuser or a wife abuser? Not really. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it.
But is it that somebody like him can go over the line really easily?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, he's at a hair trigger temper, and he's completely fearless. Like, he's not, and they mentioned in the movie too, like after his wife passes away, that he thinks he became a better cop because he just wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of dying anymore, because the way he figured, like, my wife passed away and we never had a child together, so it's just me. Is that a good quality in a police officer? Yes, but it's also a bad quality too. It's a good quality in the sense that Henry's going to probably be the first one to break in the door. But it's also a bad quality too when a police officer feels like he's got nothing to lose. So, just do whatever you guys want to me. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Henry, to me, falls way much into the us versus them policing. He's not a team player with the cops, and he's not a member of the community. I think that Henry is like a force of nature, really, that he's, he sees himself almost as an avenging angel, and that he's going to clean up the streets of Detroit by himself, and nobody's going to get in his way either.
Yeah, that's then that's how Ray plays the role, like an avenging angel. I kind of quite like that because yeah, he. I don't know if he feels like he's gonna clean up the streets of Detroit himself, but I mean he's gonna smash every scumbag that he sees. And I mean, like honestly, if people are being truthful with themselves, it'd be nice to see a couple of the scumbags get smashed up.
I mean, it really does go to the point that I think every person has the two minds that, everybody's on the spectrum of between hardcore Law and Order, the hanging judge, and, try and understand criminals and why do they behave the way they do, and, the more touchy feely. But I think when anybody sees hardcore, really nasty crime, like you said, like abusers, I think that there's not many people who don't get some satisfaction of someone like that getting their comeuppance.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, right? And I mean Ray Liotta probably his best acting in the movie is he's in the car with Calvez and they're doing a stakeout and it's just like downtime, and Ray Liotta describes about how like a little girl being hurt, it's not about rules and regulations, about right and wrong. And it's probably the most famous line in the movie because it really sums up Henry's character. And previously he described that he came into I guess this was when he was just working Vice because he was wearing like a blue suit at the time. He breaks in and I think it was like a meth head's house, or he was selling crack out of his house, and he sees a little girl that's shaking and just absolutely terrified. I believe, how old did they
I think they
say
said
she
she was
was?
10, maybe.
10. And Henry sees that the stepdad had been pimping her out, and we see the scene. Henry carries her out, and I guess this is where Henry completely cracks and changes, is in this moment where he becomes like the Henry that we see in the movie, and he just beat the living crap out of the guy with an inch of his life. And to be completely honest with you, if you had walked into that situation and you see that going on, it's going to change you. You're not going to be the same person before you entered that door. You're not going to be able to see humanity in the same way. Any potential criminal that fits that kind of profile, you're just going to assume the absolute worst because you've seen it.
Isn't that the whole thing, though, that you want professionals who don't just put their emotions out there for everything and, take the law into their own hands every time? What if every cop was like that?
It's no, it's true, right? But at the end of the day, we're not dealing with, throw back to RoboCop. Like, we're not dealing with RoboCops. We're dealing with people that have to be around people like this all the time. It's going to affect you. It's going to be extremely difficult to try to see the best of humanity when you walk in a situation like that. And I wouldn't say it's a daily occurrence, something that extreme, but you see variations of it daily. If you're, say, a cop or detective in Detroit, you see the worst of the worst. We live like a pretty privileged life, many of us, where we're not surrounded by this criminality, and the cops themselves are gonna, not only are they surrounded by it, but they have to deal with it firsthand on a daily basis. They see the absolute worst of humanity all the time. And ideally, we'd like to think that this doesn't affect them or this doesn't change them over the course of their career. I assume most people who sign up to become police officers or want to be detectives go in it for the right reasons. They want to clean up the streets. They want to stop the bad guys. But over time, when you walk into situations like Henry, and you do that enough times, there's no way that that's not going to change you. It's just not going to happen. It's going to fundamentally change how you view the world.
Henry, though, Henry thinks he can save everyone. Henry, that the 10-year-old girl that he pulls out of that den of abuse, he thinks he can save her, and he covers for her as she goes through life and gets involved with drugs herself. And he's constantly bending the rules and breaking the rules to help her. He's bending the rules and breaking the rules to help Calvez. And I guess to me, what makes Henry think that he can do this, that he should be the one who's allowed to say what rules are good and what laws can be broken to get away with? Because would Henry give us any of those, any leniency if we broke rules because we thought it was a good idea? He would be the first one to smash us.
Well, in Henry's case, in particular with this girl, I think Henry came to the conclusion that I'm not going to fix Detroit. I'm not going to even really make a significant dent in terms of fixing it, but I can make a difference in this girl's life who went through horrific abuse, stuff that, if you put it in a horror film, most people would be, this couldn't possibly happen. And I would argue he did make a difference in her life. He did help her out. Yes, he did bend some of the rules. He got some of the charges dropped, but we see that she was at one point happily married and with 2 girls and has a house, and she seems to be doing okay for herself. And in terms of like bending the rules for Calvez, well, he doesn't really do it until after Calvez kills himself, where he gets the autopsy report. They take out the fact that Calvez had drugs in his system, or a significant amount of drugs in his system, indicating that he was a junkie. And the reason he's doing this is because if it comes back that he was dirty, his wife and daughter are not going to get his pension. And like, they really, at the end of the day, everything that Henry does in this movie in terms of like bending the rules and breaking some of the rules, the sole purpose of doing it is to make sure that this girl who was abused with her whole life, and the 2 daughters that she has, don't have to live in the type of poverty that is going to create that cycle again. If they can get Calvez's pension, police pensions are quite good, he's going to be able to make sure that they don't have to live in that situation. I mean, he's not breaking the rules in terms of like helping mob guys or selling drugs or, breaking into evidence like lockers so he can sell the, guns and drugs on the streets to guys. The only reason he's doing it is to help these 2 girls.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors. Henry also, I think he feels very responsible in that his moral code, once he found out that Calvez was stealing drugs from the police in lockup to give to the drug dealers to feed his own drug habit. And Calvez, we find out, is the one who blew Nick's cover and other undercover officers' cover. And Henry was going to blow him in, and that's when Calvez killed himself. I don't want Calvez's wife and his kids to be punished for what Calvez did, but people need to know about Calvez, and people need to know if the police are corrupt, and covering that up, although it's going to hurt Calvez's family, and who knows really how that would actually have played out. The people need to know if the police are trustworthy or not.
The best way I can describe it is Henry's trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. And it comes across in the movie and his performance, really. That's just why Ray Liotta's performance is so brilliant in this movie, is you can see how impossible the situation is for him. And he's trying to do the right thing. Like, to me, Henry's ultimate goal is, if I can just make a difference in one person's life, I'm going to make a difference for these 2 little girls. And you see it when Calvez shoots himself. He's upset because he did love Calvez. He was over at their house all the time. We find that out later. He did really care about Calvez. But in that situation, that all the work that Henry did to try to make a difference in that girl's life just went right out the window as soon as Calvez shot himself. All the work that he worked up to try to at least make a difference in this one couple's life just gets thrown out the window, because not only did he lose a friend, but Calvez, in killing himself, also screwed them over, because his suicide you're not getting the pension. And that's all going out the window. Like everything that Henry had worked for it's gone. And he was doing it all for the right reason.
But think about it. Think about it this way. Of all the things that Henry is doing, has Henry just gone too far down the rabbit hole? He would have killed Nick. He didn't want to, but I think he would have killed Nick in that situation at the end of the movie. I think that he clearly he takes in Busta Rhymes and his partner, who are low-level street criminals who were there doing a drug buy with Calvez right before Calvez killed himself. Ray Liotta, Henry, he was going to set these guys up for having murdered this cop. They could have, I don't know what the situation was in Michigan in the early 2000s, but potentially they could have gotten the death penalty for that. And, clearly these two guys weren't saints, but he beat the living tar out of them. He was going to get a false confession from them from something they didn't do. Like, how many lives is Henry going to ruin to save this one thing? It seems like he was too much in his own head or in his own morality to see the big picture, that he's making a major issues here that could kill and destroy many lives for his own, what he felt was his own morality.
Well, that's why I described it as an impossible situation where, through Calvez's selfish actions, Henry was trying to do the impossible. I'm sure Henry probably didn't want to do any of this. But he saw he couldn't let that girl and those two little daughters just fall into poverty. There's no way that he was going to allow that to happen. And there's a scene where Henry blames the two drug dealers for Calvez getting hooked onto the junk, but in reality, it's not. I would say it was the police department's fault that Henry got, because they put him that Calvez got hooked on the junk because they put him in that situation to begin with. And Henry talks about how the police department doesn't care about Calvez. They don't care about him. They don't really care about Nick. The only reason they want this case solved anyways is because they just want it done quick. It's a black mark that, undercover cop gets shot, unsolved murder. They want it over with as quickly as possible. And I don't think Henry was going to kill Nick. Or, to be honest with you, I don't even think Henry was going to kill those two criminals, because I don't think Henry was going to. I don't know. He doesn't come across to me as that he was willing to kill a cop. He goes to pretty extreme extents, I will say, but I don't think he was going to cross that bridge. And for the two criminals, killing them really wouldn't have solved much of anything, because he needs their confession. Otherwise, all he has is Calvez's gun was in the trunk of their car that he planted there. That's all they got. That's not enough for a conviction. They could have got that gun anywhere.
I wonder, the movie ends with Nick shoots Henry, and then the Busta Rhymes and his partner, they get out of the warehouse. Henry spills the whole beans of what happens with Calvez, and that's really how they leave it. I wonder, what do you think happened after that?
I'm not sure. See, and then Nick is put in an impossible situation, just kind of like Henry was, where, I mean, Nick can hand in the confession and completely ruin Henry's reputation and ensure that those girls don't get that pension. And I mean, the truth comes out. Who benefits from that? I guess Nick, because he solved the case, but he also killed a cop. He shot a cop, so he's going to have to explain that. Or I don't know, does he come up with a different story on the fly about what happened?
I don't see what kind of story he can make up, though. No matter what, either he tells them straight up what happened, and if Nick tells everything that happens and everything that he knows, Henry's deathbed confession about Calvez, so that torpedoes Calvez and his family, that leaves Henry's name as dirt in the department. And honestly, where does that leave Nick after it? But I don't even think he can come up with the line of lies because the everything's out on the table. And I honestly think that after it was going to come out at some point that I think Calvez, that they were going to find that Calvez killed himself. And that's why it was so imperative for Henry to get those two criminals who were mixed up with Calvez to admit to killing him, because that's the only way that they were ever going to get out of it. Eventually, they were going to find out through forensics or whatever that Calvez killed himself. But if they had that confession, maybe they could put it to bed before they dug any further into the case, and it would have been good for everyone to just put it to bed that let's tie it into a nice neat bow. Busta Rhymes killed Calvez and it's over. But if Henry didn't get that confession, it was going to blow up everything, including Henry.
Yeah. I mean, and like you brought up earlier, like, did Henry go too far? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the point of the movie, but to me, this might sound crazy and this is probably going to be unpopular, but Henry to me is a heroic person and in an anti-hero kind of way, because at the core of it, he was trying to do the right thing. He really was. I mean, and you can say, Busta Rhymes is, and those two characters are low-end criminals or what have you, but they weren't really that low-end. Like they're buying police guns, they're selling guns on the street, they're connected with the guy Dowd or whatever, the criminal at the beginning of the movie that was selling that super junk that was killing people. Like these were not good people. And they made their choices too in life. And I mean, eventually, if it wasn't Henry, eventually they'd find themselves in a similar situation. And the movie presents them as somewhat. I get it. I get it. We have the Constitution. Well, you guys have the Constitution. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. I get it, but I don't feel sorry for them. I don't feel sorry for them.
But at the end of the day, they didn't do that. They probably did a lot of other things that they could have gone down for, but they didn't kill Calvez. I think in a way, Henry, by being so rigid in his morality, he made things worse by covering things up. Now, I don't see any way that if they dig, they're not going to find out the truth. The IA or the brass and at the Detroit PD, they're going to find out that Calvez killed himself. They have to find a way. They're going to find out that in some way Henry was corrupted. Even if he was corrupted for the best of reasons, he was still corrupted, and that he had done all these things. I don't see a way out of this, and I think that it put Nick in a really bad position too.
Well, that's Nick tells that to Henry, that I can't believe you would put me in this situation, right? And it isn't fair to Nick. But that's, to me, is what makes the Henry Oakes's character so interesting, so fascinating. Is there's moments where like I totally get what he's trying to do, and then there's moments where like he's gone too far. And it's this back and forth battle. Me and you've been discussing it all week. Like, who is Henry Oakes? Is he a really bad person, or is he a really good person, or is he right in between? And I think the conclusion we can reach is probably he's right in between.